And that leads us to our topic for today and our panelists, the grumpy old VCs. A couple of years ago, there was a movie called Something Ventured. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's a fabulous movie, and I highly recommend it. It's a documentary about a handful of men who were the original venture capitalists in Silicon Valley in the late 1950s. They were the founding fathers of the entire venture capital industry, and they were doing venture capital before there even was such a term. Our speakers today are some of the earliest venture capitalists in Minnesota, and they were the pioneers of not only the local venture capital industry, but basically the precursor to the angel investing that is supporting many of you. Their bios are very impressive and quite lengthy, and as such, I'm going to let them tell their own stories and introduce themselves. But with that said, what I am going to tell you is that Dick Perkins began his investment career as a buy-side analyst in 1957. Andy Greenshields started in the venture industry in 1973, Norm Dann in 1980, and along with Andy Greenshields co-founded Pathfinder Ventures, and John Trucano started his venture career in 1978. That's a collective 168 years of investment wisdom sitting right here in front of you. So, wow, what a great opportunity for all of us to have. As I mentioned, I did something like this about 10 years ago at the Minnesota Venture Capital Association. It was a lot of fun. This is intended to be fun. It's your opportunity to jump in. I do have a list of questions that I'll start with, but if anybody wants to jump in and ask questions, I know Kelsey has a mic and she'll run around and mic up anybody who wants to ask questions, but again, this is intended to be interactive and your show as well, so please participate. So with that said, Dick Perkins is on my immediate right here, and maybe we'll just go down my right to further right, and we'll give everybody just a minute or so to kind of briefly talk about their career.
Who goes first? Me?
You go first.
Oh, okay. Well, I've had three, I think, distinct careers in the investment business. It was mentioned 1957, but the first number of years I was on the buy side where I managed money with a bank in Chicago, then with the Mayo Foundation, then ultimately running the pension fund for Standard Oil of Ohio. And at the end of that time, I came to Piper Jaffray in 1966. And that's really when the venture part started, although I was a analyst, salesman. Somehow when people came in the door, they got referred to me. And so I did raise some money privately and put some of my own money alongside, and that in later years helped me a great deal. Then 28 years ago, I started my own business called Perkins Capital Management, where we essentially manage other people's money, mutual fund, small hedge fund, individual accounts, and so on. But I spent a lot of time on venture capital then because one of my accounts turned out to be a public pension fund that wanted some of their money to be invested in small private companies. And so as a result, I got to see an awful lot of deals and tagged along behind a lot of other people.
Well, and Dick was one of the most active investors in town with the early stage companies, and it's a privilege to have you here, so thank you. And one of those people you were tagging along with was Andy. So Andy, give us a little background on your career.
Well, there's a word of warning, don't try this at home. I was a history major out of the University of Minnesota, and I was at Honeywell in the aerospace business, the Apollo program, and then a super spook program for the CIA, which was a lot of fun. And Nixon cut the defense budget, and I decided this was going to be a lousy place to work, and went with a friend in an unsuccessful startup, and there I met Bud Rolson, and Bud had a deal on trouble, and needed a plant manager down in Madelia, Minnesota, making some bread dough. And my trade-off for not getting stuck in Madelia for the rest of my life was looking at these business plans he was getting looked like it was really fun. And that kind of started my career. And then got a call from Norm and Gary, who were trying to raise a fund, and they said, hey, I think we could use your help in getting this done, and we got her done and had more fun. It was a great business, and I enjoyed it very much. Norman?
Well, actually, let's keep going. Well, let's let John. I would also say that John Trucano started his career, as I said, in 1978 in the venture capital industry. So he's got a lot of venture capital years under his belt. Not quite as many years as the other guy. So he was very polite to go along with the grumpy old VCs. So I appreciate that very much, John. John?
I'm only grumpy when the work doesn't work, the deals don't work. My background was basically 4 years in banking and then 24 years in venture capital with 3 different funds, the last of which was the food fund, which invested only in food deals. I still remember in 1978, I just got into the venture business, and I went to a thing like this, and Andy was on the panel, and somebody said, what's it like investing in early stage companies, Andy? And he said, well, I was driving in today, and I saw a bumper sticker that told me exactly what it's like. The bumper sticker said, shit happens. And it does.
Great. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Shit does happen, for sure. Norm?
So I've been a very lucky guy. First of all, I was born in this country, the first in my generation. That was a good start. My background basically was engineering, which I practiced for about 10 years with a company called Designers for Industry in Cleveland. And then I started a rep business, which in those days was involved with medical research equipment, when really sales wasn't the issue. The issue was providing a warranty service. All this stuff was built kind of one-off, and these little companies needed somebody to help install the equipment. And so really my engineering experience came in handy, because a lot of this stuff I had never seen before, and you kind of help the scientists set up the gear. Some of that equipment began to become clinical. One of the little companies I started representing was called Medtronic, in the days when pacemaker wasn't here yet. But what people don't really remember is that Medtronic made a lot of lab equipment. They made core thermometers and animal respirators and all kinds of stuff, which we sold one of each, probably per year. That company was purchased by Medtronic some 10 years later, when they were consolidating their marketing, and I found myself inside Medtronic running sales and marketing and later development. And after about 10 years of that, I began to realize that I'm not really cut out to work for a large company. And I had met Gary Stoltz because we both moved here from Cleveland. He moved here to join Control Data, and I moved here to join Medtronic. And when you move to a new city, you're always looking for people you can hook up with. And our families got together and we became good friends. And Gary left a company called Data 100. And he kept saying to me, when you get tired over there, he's opened a consulting shop, and why don't you join me? And one day I called him and I said, I think if you got that desk opened, I'm going to do that. So we got together and formed a company called Pathfinder Consulting. And because Gary had spent a lot of time raising money for Data 100, he became knowledgeable all the venture funds in the country. I mean, he was looking for pots of gold all over the place. And he really introduced me to that group. I didn't know, frankly, that they existed at that point. And we began doing consulting. I mean, he introduced me, and I began getting the medical jobs, and of course, he was looking at computer stuff and whatnot. And one day I said to him, this is really a lot of fun. I mean, we get a fee for doing this stuff, and we turn over these hotshot outfits to these venture guys, and they make a lot of money. I said, why don't we do that? And he told me the 101 reasons why we shouldn't do that, because it's hard to raise funds and whatnot. But the net of it was, we did finally raise a fund in 1980. And one of the potential investors said to us, don't you guys think it'd be a good idea if you had somebody in your group that knew something about venture capital? And we thought, gee, that's not a bad idea. And we recruited Andy to go do that. And the three of us ended up putting our first fund together. So that was a happy trip. We ended up putting three funds together under that flag. So
Good, great, thanks, Norm. So now that you've all given us a little background on how you got involved in the industry
what does this thing do?
and what kinds of deals you're in and so forth, as you look at the investment market today and you look kind of back in time as to when you were investing, what do you think are the main differences?
Yeah.
And feel free to chime in, whoever wants to tackle it.
I'm not all that active anymore. I do some private investing, but I guess the main thing I see now is probably an extra zero. What used to maybe be a $1 million, venture capital investment is now a $10 million investment, and everything is increased in terms of the overhead of companies. And I was always involved in relatively small venture funds, and so I was always very careful with money and wanted to make sure that whatever money I put into a deal could hopefully get them through to cash flow positive. And because, doing a second round with a small fund is very difficult. So, I think today it's a different game, and I'm sort of glad I'm not in it.
Well, following up on what John said, I got in the business when nobody knew what a venture capitalist was. They'd ask me in a neighborhood party what I did, and then they'd expect to see a for sale sign on my lawn in a couple of weeks because they had no clue. But to me, what's dazzling is the amount of money involved in getting a business launched. It's just astonishing. And then people expecting a very early exit when the company hasn't made a damn dime yet. There's, when you start to pay $2 billion for this and that, and it blows my mind. And the other thing is, I'd hate to be on the compensation committee of a publicly held company, because when I got off my last public board in 2008, I saw the consultants' reports, and God only knows what they look like now. The salaries are just unbelievable for achieving that much.
I remember one of the deals I was involved with at the food fund. We had some money into a deal, and it went public through John Kennard here, a local brokerage firm back then. And first board meeting after the public offering, the father and son who had started this thing came in, and they said, here's our new compensation plan. I said, what are you talking about? You just did a public offering. You showed what your compensation was. And I said, well, we're underpaid. And so they sent this thing around, and they wanted to double the salary, and they wanted a bunch of stock options. And they had two buddies on the board. And I said, what do you guys think? They said, we're going to vote for it. I said, fine. I wrote out my resignation, walked out of the room, and resigned from the board. And he said, it's just hard to believe some of the things that go on, even in public companies. When you're in front of shareholders, they don't care.
So, yeah, anyway, my career's been all in the medical thing, so I can only speak to that arena. But the medical device field happens to be a big industry in this town. And just as an announcement, we are in deep doo-doo. The venture model for bringing new medical products to market is broken. And it doesn't work for several reasons now. I don't think there's any fund in town that I'm aware of that will invest in a medical device that requires a PMA, that is an extensive clinical to get approval. And the reason for that, these are not fools, they're very bright people. The reason is that nominally today, to bring that kind of product to market is 10 years and $100 million. When we closed Pathfinder 1, our first medical product was brought to market for $350,000. It was an IV pump that we ended up selling to 3M. So it just not quite the same thing, but I'm just giving you a relationship. So venture funds are nominally 10-year funds. You can't do 10-year projects. It just doesn't fit anymore. So the problem we find ourselves in is that, yes, there are angel investors, and yes, there are private money, and we can raise now just enough money for these guys to get in trouble. I mean, so you do the first round or two, you build a prototype, you sort of prove that the device works, and now you need some real money. Because the expensive part of this process is probably not the engineering, it's the clinical study. And believe it or not, in my day, we didn't pay for that. I mean, doctors and hospitals were delighted to do clinical trials. They thought this was really a privilege. They were hungry for this stuff. But today, this is a business. This is a major league business. I think our pharmaceutical friends trained them well. And now to do these clinicals, I mean, some of these studies run $30,000 to $50,000 a patient because you have to pay for the procedure, you have to pay for the follow-up data, you have to pay for getting the data analyzed. You probably have to hire a CRO to do it because the FDA doesn't trust you that you're going to do it honestly, and so forth. So we've taken an industry that, by the way, was invented in this country and fully developed in this country, and we've exported it. If you want to do one of these products today, you take it to Europe. There probably isn't a major product that was first introduced in this country. The core valve, which is Medtronic's minimally invasive valve that's put in with a catheter, which is the new technology in heart valves, was in Europe with a CE mark approved for 4 years before it entered U.S. clinicals. Now, that's terrible. I mean, we shouldn't do that. And we're talking, I mean, there's conversations going on about how to speed that process and how to improve it. But we have made that process so difficult and so expensive that one of the things that business analysts, when they look at our business plans, when you get to the part that says, okay, we got to go for FDA approval, nobody knows what that's going to cost or how long it will take. And that's just too big a risk. And by the way, after that, if it's really a new category of product, there's no reimbursement code. And so the next thing you have to do, which is done annually, is to apply for a code that will provide reimbursement for that product. So we have made this process extremely difficult, extremely expensive, and the professional investors, who, by the way, you need in these companies, because these companies do not have complete management systems, they don't have all the people they need. The investors who end up on the board are filling those posts. I mean, you, in fact, are helping these guys complete that job. And so professionals are needed. It isn't just the money.
Yep. Tough road in that market, that's for sure. And all you have to do is look at the landscape here in town, as you alluded to.
Am I getting grumpy enough?
Well, that's pretty grumpy. So we'll come down to this end. Perk, what's the differences today versus back when you were investing?
Well, let's go back for a second to what Norm was saying. I think it's a next thing to a miracle that we have new medical products on the market today. I mean, when you think about what he said and the length of time and the amount of money that it takes, it's all different. And to your question that you just asked, it is, I think that it takes so long these days to get a successful product that people that have invested in the past are waiting for success, and it just takes longer and longer and longer, and as a result, it's becoming today more and more difficult for money to be raised for new companies or even for existing ones that are trying to expand. It's a tough. Not that everybody today necessarily wants instant gratification, but there's a limit to the amount of time that people are willing to wait to get results.
Yep.
So it's changed a great deal. We talked earlier, I'll make a plug here, if I might, for Don Hall's new book called Generations of Wealth. And I thought about that, Rick, when you said 1957, which is when I started in the investment business. I was about 2 years late to the party that was going on here in Minneapolis when Bill Norris sold shares in Control Data for $1 a piece, door to door. And that in itself changed the entire investment business here in Minneapolis, and I just would suggest that all of you go out and spend $20 for a copy of Don's book.
All right, thank you. We will. So, if those are some of the things that are challenges, kind of flipping and going to the other end, what was your best deal or deals, and why did it work so well?
I'll start. The deal that it didn't necessarily make us the most money, it made us good money, but the one that probably is best known here in the food fund was started out in Boston called Keurig. And Keurig is a single-serve coffee system. I actually met these guys in the top of an old watch factory in Boston. They had an idea. All they had was a wooden prototype, and they had an ironing board where they ironed some filter paper into a cartridge, and they put a top on it, ironed that on, showed me how it was going to work. And I got pretty intrigued by it, but it took us 2 years to find another venture capital firm in Boston to co-invest with us. We didn't have enough money. And then Murphy's Law hit. Everything went wrong with that company for the next 3 years. The brewer didn't work. We couldn't find somebody to make the equipment to make these.
Bumper sticker was right.
Right, darn right. Yeah. Anyway, by 1998, we were 3 years into it. We finally had our first dollar of revenue. By the year 2000, we were the #1 single-serve coffee system in the United States office market. And then we were making all kinds of money. And then we decided to dump money into a home brewer. And for the next 5 or 6 years, we struggled with that home brewer. And this company was sold to Green Mountain Coffee in 2006. The year we sold it, we had made $10 million profit in our office coffee division. We had lost $10 million in our home division. And the Green Mountain at the time was a $200 million bagged coffee company. Today they are a $4.2 billion coffee company, of which $4 billion is Keurig. So, it was a phenomenal success for Green Mountain. It was a great success for us. But as Andy had talked about it, even in the, not like the medical area, this one took a long time. It took 12 years from start to finish before we got that thing sold to Green Mountain.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Norman, why don't you pick one and then I'll talk about it.
Well, the biggest dollar hit that we did, which shows that shit luck is sort of like what drives this whole thing, was a company called Lifomed, which was in Chicago. It was a generic pharmaceutical company, which is natural, so I'm a medical device guy, right? I know nothing about pharmaceuticals. But what happened, I looked at a deal in Boston. There was a guy that made equipment for monitoring temperatures and pressures and whatnot in the pharmaceutical industry. And I lost the deal. I mean, we pitched him a valuation, and he said to me, he called me a week or so after I visited and said, we had a local firm that outbid you. And I said, listen, if I were you, you got to take the higher valuation. It's the only smart thing for you to do. But we had hit it off, and I think liked each other. And a week or two later, I get a call from him, and he says, listen, there's a guy in Chicago that's got a deal. He said, there's not much venture capital in Chicago. It's not an active community. He said, you ought to go see this guy. He's a brilliant guy, and so on. And I go to Chicago. I think, were you in that visit?
Second trip.
Oh, you were this, okay. So anyway, to give you an idea, the cab guys, when we get to the address, he says, do you know where you are? I said, I haven't got the foggiest. He said, well, this is a tough neighborhood. He said, I'll wait till you get in the door. So this is an indication of the kind of the quality of this place. They had bars on the windows. So I walk in. I meet this guy, John Kapoor, who's an Indian, who got a pharmaceutical. He was a pharmacist degree in India, but he was trained in the U.S. He had actually a master's in medicinal chemistry, I think, from NYU. He was obviously a very bright guy, and he gets up at a flipboard and starts to give me a pitch about how he's going to build this company. Now, he was brought in because this company was bought by some cardboard box manufacturer who thought that they must use cardboard boxes, it must be a good business. They didn't know anything about it. They were in trouble with the FDA. The company was in bad straits. They bring John in to clean the place up and get it ready for sale. And John said to them, listen, I want to have the right of last refusal to bid on this, even though he had no money. And they said, oh yeah, sure, you can have that. So he did clean this thing up, and he hit on a marketing concept which really built the company. And it had to do with IV solutions. In that period, they were just learning the fact that if you were on IV solutions for 15 days or more, the government mandated that you get trace elements of things like molybdenum and iron and whatever that we normally have in our body in small quantities. But when you're on a pure IV solution that doesn't have that stuff, these things get washed out. And these patients start to show symptoms of problems that the primary care doctor doesn't recognize because it had nothing to do with the disease that he was in there being treated for. But they found if you can now add this stuff, so the federal government mandated, I think, 12 vitamins and minerals that had to be put in all IV solutions. And what John had come up with is that nobody had marketed to the hospital this package of material in a convenient format. They had to buy it from a lot of different people. It wasn't packaged in the right volumes and everything else. So he set about putting together a line of these things, and we built actually a $30 million business just supplying that niche market. But this guy was...
And sold it for?
Well, the interesting thing was we ended up selling this company to Fujisawa. Fujisawa is a Japanese, obviously, pharmaceutical company who wanted to make a presence in the U.S. market because they were under constraint in Japan for price controls on drugs at that time. And like this company, they had already become a 30% stockholder in the company, had a member on the board, and they kept saying to us, we'd like to buy in more. When we finally said to them, look, guys, we can't sell you more of the company because you'll be in control of it. So if you want the company, you got to make up your mind to buy it. Anyway, they bought it for $1 billion.
And the original investment was?
I think we had about 600,000, 650 in it.
All right.
It was a pretty good return.
That's a pretty good deal. Andy, you want to layer anything on top of that?
Yeah,
or?
I'll mention another company, but when I went to that neighborhood with Norman, I went to get a package of cigarettes, and the company insisted that I have 2 bodyguards walk across the street to the convenience store next door. But anyhow, Norman gets a call about a company out in California that was going to do something called angioplasty. And so I said, yeah, I'll go out there with you. And so we fly out and take a look at this company, and they were wonderful people. And all the way back in the airplane, all Norman and I could talk about was how the hell are we going to convince Stoltz, the third partner, that you're going to stick a balloon into somebody's heart and blow it up and bust up plaque and do all of this stuff. And so we decided we'd get a strategy of talking to somebody at the University of Minnesota because they're big on hearts, and the Mayo Clinic. And first guy Gary calls over there, of course, Gary goes nuts when he hears this. He calls somebody over at the U. No, I've read some papers on that. There's no damn way I'm going to stick a balloon into one of my patients. Well, anyhow, 3 years later, the University of Minnesota was posting billboards around town bragging about how many angioplasty procedures they'd done. But the marvelous thing about this deal is, lot of the companies I've been involved in who've gotten sold have been real disappointments after they've gotten sold. But this got sold to Lilly, had a huge earnout involved in it. We achieved the earnout. Lilly was happy, we were happy, everybody was happy, and it turned out to be an incredible success and put all my kids through college tax-free to me. So
Perfect.
There is one lesson in that one, by the way, because a lot of these mergers don't work. You know, I mean, companies buy these companies, and the next couple of years they're spitting them out the back door. But one of the things that was engineered in that buyout is that we said to Lilly, you guys don't know anything about this business, you're in a pharmaceutical thing, and the only way we agree to the earnout is you can't touch the company until the earnout's complete, or you take over the company. If you change management or change the company in any way, you got to pay us off. And they let us alone for 4 years after that earnout. I think we made the 4-year earnout in 3 years.
we did.
Wow.
And that company was we failed to mention, was sold for $100 million with a $50 million earnout, and we got every penny of the earnout. It was based half on sales and half on profit. But the criteria of not bugging us, I mean, just we had a good team in place, we had a marvelous guy run the company, and they just did their thing. And Lilly stood there and watched, and it was terrific.
So the lesson is to get some time to go execute against your plan without them getting in your hair.
Check.
Perk, how about you?
Well, I can't cite one specific company with a story like that that I've been involved in, but I could probably cite, 5 or 6 or 7 where, going back as far as, 35 years ago, I put my own money alongside that of others, and somehow, because they thought I was smarter or knew more about what I was doing, I wound up on the boards of these companies, and so I can, companies like Lifecore Biomedical is one, Synovus Biotech is another, Vital Images, CNS that was on the board with Andy was a great success, and all of these took a lot of time. It took a lot of management, took a lot of talent, but over the years they all grew. And as of this point, I mean, I try to remember exactly how many boards of directors that I was on. 6, 7, 8, whatever. They've all been sold, and very, very good for the shareholders. But one thing that they all have in common, regardless of what endeavor they were in, is that it took boards of directors with some moxie and some some persuasiveness. But over time, I think that each and every one of these companies had at least 2, if not 3, new presidents along the way to make them work. And I know that that's the case at the company I just mentioned, but in every case, that was it. And what it all then therefore comes down to, just as has been mentioned in the things that John and Dan said, and Norm said, is that the people are very important. I think that's the most important ingredient, is the people. And oftentimes you don't know, as they say, you don't know what you don't know next. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort on the part of a lot of people to make these things work.
Okay.
For the benefit of the shareholders.
So, by the way, on that CNS story, which is sort of fun, because I'm the guy that got involved with that company first, and at the time we had 2 doctors that had invented an EEG machine that was going to portray EEG so surgeons could understand it, as opposed to having an electroencephalographer. And it was for doing carotid surgeries, because one of the things that they were worried about when they did carotid surgery, if you're going to work on one side of the carotid, you got to make sure that the other one isn't plugged up, because otherwise the brain will get no oxygen. And so they wanted to monitor the EEG and read that part of it that they noted, that the brain is getting oxygenated. Anyway, the company, and then I left the board, which is probably a smart move, and Andy went on. We had a little reorganization in our shop. We had everybody that was knowledgeable about computers, and we were becoming a medical fund. So anyway, the thing that made the company money was that nose guard, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Never mind that EEG. We couldn't give that damn thing away. I mean, it was a $70,000 machine that nobody wanted. So it's just an interesting thing that what this company started out to do was a complete failure. Okay, but God bless him. The doc that ended up running the company didn't give up. Picked up another product. He licensed this thing, built it into a hell of a business.
But Norm, the part of that, it's just, everybody sort of likes stories, and I guess that's what we're doing here is telling stories.
Yeah, some are even true.
But it was because of that business. I mean, CNS did not find the breathe right. The guy that invented it.
Yeah, no, they bought it, sure.
And he was, right, so he was trying to find a place to go, and so the company had the good sense
Yes,
to do that.
absolutely.
Now, this company was sold a long while ago. I'll give you all an interesting little story then that maybe you don't know or maybe you do know. The company also had, another inventor had come to the company who had taken the same principle and applied it to horses and had made literally a breathe right for horses to help them keep because horses don't breathe through their mouth when they run. If you watch a horse race, they're not breathing through their mouth like we might do when we were running. It's all through the nose. And so it's very important. Well, of course, when the company was sold, the buyer didn't want that part of the business. They had no desire in that at all. And so that was given back to the inventor, who has now had the greatest free publicity that you could ever have, because California Chrome was wearing a breathe right. Well, it's not called a breathe right. It's called
Heavy horse ride.
I can't remember the name of it, but anyway.
Flare.
So what's that?
Flare.
Flare. Thanks, Andy. So when you watch the Belmont on Saturday, you'll see, and in fact in the Derby and in the Preakness, there were no other horses wearing a flare, and I wonder now if you'll see more than one on Saturday wearing a flare.
Lovely.
Let's see how there a lot of interesting stories can be developed out of any of the companies that we've been in
Amen.
along the way.
All right, so one last formal question. Again, we have the room as long as anybody wants to stay. But flipping that around and say, okay, you made some investments that didn't work. And unfortunately, there probably were plenty of them. At a high level, what's kind of the short answer or answers to why didn't they work? What went wrong, and if there were a couple of things that you might point to share with the audience for them to keep an eye out for, what would that be?
My worst investment was the first one in the food fund, and I think you felt a little pressure to put money out when you raise a fund, and probably didn't do as much due diligence as I should, and this company was growing rapidly, and they needed to move to a new location, and make a long story short, Murphy's Law hit. New equipment came in, it didn't work, and the company fell behind on orders, lost customers, and within probably a year, they were back to us looking for more money. We said, we're not going to put any more in, and they went kaput. So I think the story there is I just didn't do enough due diligence. I felt a little pressure to to put the money out now that we had raised it, and it was embarrassing because it was the first investment we made.
Yeah, I think the tough part is to admit you're wrong. And most of us hang around these deals too long because, damn it, we're going to make them work, no matter, we'll stand on our heads and whatever. And the fact is, it's people. I mean, good people with a mediocre idea can build a company, and bad people with a terrific idea will screw it up. So it just ends up being management. I remember one early deal I did in our first fund was a continuous EKG recording system, which, I mean, software was a new thing in those days, and these guys were sitting in dark rooms thinking about stuff.
Smoking strange product.
Right. And I paid, we put $750,000 into this dog, and or maybe it was, I forget the number, but it's in that neighborhood. And it just wasn't going anyplace. And I began to realize that there's no way I'm going to pull this thing out. And having been in the rep business, I repped a company called Quinton Instruments. Quinton was one of the early guys making treadmills and stuff, which were those days sold to cardiologists, by the way, never mind gyms. And he was trying to add electronics to his line. And I called him and I said, I got this terrific software guy who really knows how to do EKGs and stuff, and sure enough, I was able to get my investment out by dumping this thing on this guy, but he knew how to handle it because he had his own technical people. And I remember standing up at our first meeting where we had our investors, and I had to stand up and report our first failure. And I said, guys, I'm really sorry I put this money in this. The bad news is I lost a $750,000 investment. The good news is I sold this thing for $750,000. So we got our money out, and it was a round of applause. And one guy stood up and said, you did the right thing. He said, you didn't wait too long. You got the hell out. You salvaged what you could. That's the thing to do. And that's the big lesson. We diddle around too long with these things, and they die on you. I mean, it's just, but those decisions are very tough.
It's a tough thing.
Because we're admitting our own failure.
Yep.
Perk?
It's the old story, if you're, it's hard to admit that you're wrong. And there's that saying, if I'm in for a dime, I'm in for a dollar. And so the company needs more money, and you're trying to protect what you have. And so you do that, and you do it again and again and again, and all of a sudden you're in an impossible situation. So one of the things I tell people is, invest not thy whole wad.
So you've been to those investor meetings where everybody sits around the table and looks at their shoes and trying to figure out.
I know all about it.
I think people have mentioned other things. We've had Pathfinder had a couple of weird things that happened to us, not so weird. We had 3 different patent troll suits in 3 different companies, which cost an enormous amount of money, and more importantly, distracted the very thin management teams we had in those companies away from what they're supposed to be doing to try to deal with these patent trolls, which were very expensive and damn near killed all the companies. And the other thing that really caused a lot of trouble in a couple of companies I was involved with is the early patient selection to do the FDA clinicals. The companies were so hot to get into their clinical trials that they selected patients that were damn near in the casket to do their clinical trials on, and it screwed up, in one case, their data because the first 2 patients skewed the data so bad on the further submissions that it took another 18 months of new patients to get rid of those first 2. And so just kind of odd things. And it's, my bumper sticker is right. I still got it. And, it's, but That's why you're in the business. Have fun.
All right, well, I think we could stay forever. And actually, again, we do have the room, and everybody can stay as long as they want, but just to be careful with everybody's schedules, it's a little after 1, ran a little long, but it was a fabulous discussion, so thank you, panelists.